What if behind the walls of a familiar school building there is not only knowledge, but also silence? What if behind an ordinary brick there is not just a foundation, but a memory of something that once disappeared without a trace? Sometimes the most disturbing stories begin not with a loud event, but with silence. With the silence of an autumn day in which everything seems too ordinary. It was mid-October 1966. It was a surprisingly calm day. The city seemed to have slowed down, leaves swirled gently in the air, the sun glided softly across the rooftops, the streets were bathed in light and the light aroma of the bakery on the corner. Everything around exuded confidence and familiar routine. After classes ended, children ran out of the school doors, with backpacks, laughing, with autumn leaves under their feet. Among them was Justin, an 11-year-old boy, quiet, collected, with an attentive look and a careful gait. The teachers spoke of him with respect, responsible, independent, always returned home on time. His bag was leather, dark, slightly worn, but well taken care of. He took care of his things like an adult. After passing the school gates, Justin headed home. The route was familiar, only a few blocks. He knew these streets better than anyone. Everything should go as usual. But he didn't return home that day. At first, his mother wasn't worried. Maybe he was late, dropped in on some friends, stayed in the library. But her anxiety grew. She left the store, started looking, calling neighbors, going into their yards. No one had seen Justin. Not at school, not on the way home, not in their yard. By evening, the streets seemed to have changed. The shadows grew longer, the shop windows became colder. And with this came the understanding, something had gone wrong. The mother called the police. And that same evening, the feeling of calm in the city was disturbed.
How could a boy walking down a familiar street in broad daylight simply disappear?
Without noise, without a trace, without witnesses? What happened to Justin? Where did his path end, and why did no one notice? By the time the police car pulled up to Justin's house, the sun was already setting, painting the streets in soft, unsettling hues. His mother stood by the door, holding back her emotions, clutching her hands to her chest, as if hoping that now he would show up, as usual. She repeated the same words, like a prayer, "He's always on time. Always. He can't help but show up." The first hours after the missing person report were the most tense. The patrol began with simple questions. What time did the boy leave school? What was he wearing? Did he often walk alone? Everything pointed to Justin simply walking home, along a familiar, short route. He was an independent child, not prone to lingering on the streets. But now, he was nowhere to be found. The police immediately organized the first round. 2 officers walked along the surrounding streets, looked into parks, talked to passers-by. They knocked on doors and asked, "Have you seen the boy?" But no one saw anything. Not the salesman on the corner, not the neighbor, not the children playing near the entrances. It was as if the city had suddenly gone blind and had not noticed what had happened before its eyes. Soon people began to gather at the family's house. Some brought warm food, some brought old lanterns, and some began to help print the announcements. Justin's father, having learned of the situation, urgently came from a neighboring town. He arrived in the evening, all on the road, with anxiety in his eyes, but still with hope. He must have just been delayed somewhere. But with every minute, with every hour, the silence became more noticeable. The city seemed to have stopped breathing. The search began. Police officers with flashlights walked around the nearest buildings, courtyards, alleys. They looked where no one usually looks.
No one slept.
Neither parents, nor neighbors, nor the officers themselves. People seemed to sense that something had changed in the air. And the city, which had previously seemed simple and predictable, suddenly became different. The familiar streets seemed to fade. Ordinary sounds took on a new, disturbing tone. And in every conversation, in every glance, there was a silent confession. If it could happen to Justin, it could happen to anyone. But Justin never came back. And while some were looking for his steps, another, terrible question arose more and more often. If no one saw him, does that mean someone saw him but kept quiet? The morning in the city began differently. There was something in the air, as if it had become a little colder, quieter, more attentive to every rustle. People opened their windows and were no longer in a hurry. They looked around, listened. The newspapers, which usually delighted with announcements of sales and festivals, were different this time. On the front page in large print, "Schoolboy missing."
Have you seen Justin?
A temporary headquarters was set up at the local police station. On the walls were street maps, routes, photographs, a list of those who might know something. They decided to act quickly, to question everyone who was near the school on the day of the disappearance. Teachers, students, shop assistants, passers-by, even random drivers passing by. Some said they saw the boy near the school stadium. Some said they saw him near the snack stand. But all the testimonies were vague. No one could name the exact time, no description matched. And most importantly, no one saw Justin go home. As if he was there, but not completely. As if only a trace of his presence remained, like a light breath of wind in the corridor. In 1966, there were no cameras, no geolocation, no phones, no instant messaging. All that was left was people's memories and hand-drawn maps. And it seemed even stranger that the boy had disappeared not somewhere far away, not in a deserted place, but literally among people, among the bustle of the day, at a time when the city was living its usual life. The police wasted no time. They began searching. They inspected vacant lots, entrances, backyards, school buildings.
The banks of the river.
Volunteers joined the cause. Former military personnel, pensioners, teenagers. Everyone wanted to help. Justin's photos appeared everywhere, in shop windows, at bus stops, at the entrance to stores. But no matter how much they searched, there was nothing. No objects, no notes, no randomly found thing.
Only emptiness.
And that was what scared me the most. Because when there is not the slightest clue, you start to think, what if someone did everything to make it happen? What could have made Justin turn away from his usual path? Who could he have met that made him linger? And why is everything still so quiet? The days dragged on painfully slowly, as if time itself had decided to stretch out each hour, forcing people to live through the same feeling, uncertainty. Justin was missing, and no one could figure out where he had gone. His family was no longer the only one who was unable to sleep at night. In every house, in every kitchen, over evening tea, the same question was increasingly heard. How is this even possible? The police continued their work. More patrols appeared on the streets, with notebooks, with questions. People whispered at the entrances, discussed different versions among themselves. The officers went around the houses again and again, asking questions, looking into old sheds, backyards, even abandoned premises where no one usually goes. But all to no avail. It's as if the city itself had built an invisible wall that couldn't be crossed. A tense silence fell over Justin's school. The teachers, especially his homeroom teacher, were dejected. Some children began to cry during class, others simply remained silent, their noses buried in their notebooks, as if they were afraid to look up. In the staff room, they whispered. He was such a quiet boy. The kind who always went straight home. The principal went around all the classes. He personally spoke to each student, hoping that someone had noticed, heard, remembered something. At least a word, at least a hint. But the children only shook their heads. There was more than just fear in their eyes. Their silence conveyed the feeling that even in a familiar world, you can suddenly disappear from sight, and no one will understand how it happened. Meanwhile, the story reached the newspapers and the television. The evening news said, no leads.
No one saw anything.
The boy disappeared in broad daylight. People became more attentive. Children were no longer allowed out alone. Stores began to close early. The streets seemed to shrink, narrow, become alien. And amidst this new caution, strange sensations began to emerge. As if the houses themselves knew something. As if the silence beyond the walls was no longer just silence. Especially in the library, almost no one went there now. The emptiness in this room seemed especially noticeable, especially echoing. The police were considering various versions. Perhaps Justin had simply gone off-route. Perhaps someone had accidentally detained him or distracted him. But if it really was a misunderstanding, why had no one gotten in touch yet? Why is there not a single clue? And then something invisible began to change in the city. People began to speak more quietly. They smiled less often. It was as if everyone began to understand that sometimes even familiar streets can conceal something incomprehensible. And the city, which seemed reliable, suddenly became uncommunicative. A month passed. A whole month, no news, no calls, no hint of an answer. Only emptiness, which seemed to have become part of the city's architecture. The street that Justin had once calmly walked home along now seemed to have lost its shape. Adults tried to go around it. Children turned away, as if they were afraid that if they looked, something inexplicable would happen. It wasn't just the boy who was gone. The very feeling of being in control was gone. That day always leads to evening. That a child leaving school would always open the door to the house. His parents, they were just there now.
Without words. Without a future.
His mother, who had been cheerful, sociable, with lively eyes, no longer left the house. She sat by the window and looked at the sidewalk, as if trying to capture the image that had been familiar for so long. His father had left work and spent almost all his time at the police station, not because there was anything new happening there, but because there was still some kind of foothold there. Meanwhile, everyone who could took part in the search. Volunteers, pensioners, employees, teenagers. The city was combed dozens of times. The outskirts, attics, underground passages, old warehouses. Flyers with Justin's photo hung on poles, a fair-haired boy with an open, attentive look and a leather bag on his shoulder. But no one called.
No one found out.
Rumors began to circulate. Some said they had seen the boy at the train station. Some claimed he might have gone to visit distant relatives. One person claimed he had been riding with a similar child on a bus. But all of this crumbled like mirages in the heat. Not a single fact was confirmed. It was as if someone was always one step ahead. As if an invisible hand was carefully wiping away every trace, not just from the streets, but from conversations, from memory. And the more time passed, the more noticeable this feeling became. Everything connected with Justin seemed to be erased. Not vanishing suddenly, but dissolving, like ink in the rain. The parents were left with only things.
An old notebook.
Newspaper clippings. A shirt he was going to wear the next day.
And silence.
That same silence that is not just empty. It is deaf. There is no sound in it, only a feeling as if something important is hidden behind a thick wall, and you don't know how to break through it. And yet, one fact was especially disturbing. Justin's backpack was never found. It did not appear at flea markets, or in shops, or simply left in an alley. He disappeared, along with the boy, as if he had become part of something that should not be understood. And this feeling was frightening. And the city, it was starting to get used to it. People were greeting each other again, buying bread, taking their children to school. But beneath the surface lived a question.
A question without words.
A question that would not let go. And if he's still nearby? Somewhere.
A step away. 20 door.
And if he's there, why can't anyone hear him? Weeks passed. Then months. Then years. And just when it seemed like everything was about to be revealed, everything began to go quiet. The search ended as quietly as Justin had once disappeared.
The investigation came up empty.
Every street has been passed. Every witness has been questioned. Every lead has been checked.
And yet, silence.
It was as if this boy was not a part of the city, but a dream that was seen one morning and forgotten by evening. For the parents, it wasn't an ending, but an endless wait. They couldn't say, that's it, because there was nothing. No point. And so there was hope.
Quiet, stubborn, almost bitter.
The one that doesn't let you breathe, but doesn't let you go either. Justin's mother stopped returning to everyday life. She no longer worked, hardly went out. Boxes of memories became her world. School notebooks, drawings, photographs. One is especially dear. It shows Justin sitting on a swing and laughing. That laughter now sounded only in her memory. Father. He just went silent. He spent hours sitting at the table with a map of the city, drawing routes, as if trying to find an invisible turn, the point where everything changed. But the city already moved on. Rare passers-by sometimes, almost in a whisper, asked each other, "Do you remember that boy?" And they fell silent, as if realizing that they had said something forbidden. Newspapers have faded. Photographs have faded. Memories have become rare shadows. But there was one thing that seemed to become a symbol: the backpack. He was never found. It didn't appear in ads, didn't pop up in attics, and wasn't found in forgotten things. He disappeared as if he had never existed. And there was a frightening pattern to this. As if the very fact of his absence was someone's intention. Sometimes rumors leaked out. Someone allegedly saw a boy with a similar appearance. Someone wrote to the editorial office. Someone swore they heard the name. But everything crumbled like ashes. Checks are futile. Coincidences are imaginary. And hopes faded, leaving not even a smoldering ember. Justin's name was heard less and less often. It was as if time had decided to erase him from memory. He disappeared not only from the street, he disappeared from reality itself. It was as if I had never stood on that sidewalk. It's like I never opened that door. And the city did not forget. It simply learned to remain silent. Time is a strange thing. It can erase traces, smooth out edges, dull pain. Can make us keep silent, accept, forget. But sometimes, it just waits. More than 50 years passed. The city had changed beyond recognition. New houses appeared, old shops disappeared, streets changed names. Those who had once looked for Justin now had difficulty climbing the stairs. And children born in the new century had not even heard this story. They didn't know that a boy had once disappeared between these walls, and the city had fallen silent. Justin's school has gone through dozens of changes. Principals, programs, facades have changed.
Only the library seems frozen in time.
A spacious room with wooden shelves, narrow windows, and that very silence that cannot be explained in words. It smelled of old paint, books, and something else. Something that hasn't faded for decades. One autumn it was decided, it was time to transform the library. Create a multimedia zone, free up space, update ventilation. The workers began dismantling. The plaster was peeling off in layers, the panels were torn off with a dull thud.
And suddenly, something strange.
There was a niche behind the wooden paneling. It wasn't in the plans. It didn't look like part of the structure. It looked more like something hidden. One of the builders carefully broke through a section of the masonry. Behind the bricks, there was a void. And in it lay something. Covered in dust, cracked, dark, as if it had absorbed decades. This is... He froze, not finishing his sentence. Because I already knew what it was.
An old leather thing.
With frayed straps. And on it is an almost erased inscription, scratched thinly but insistently. Justin. The silence in the library became noticeable. One of the old teachers, hearing the news, only whispered, "It's that boy." He disappeared then. And at that moment the library ceased to be just a place for books. She became a memory. And the wall, which had hidden its contents for a long time, finally spoke. Not loudly. Not in words. But louder than any screams.
And the city. I remembered the city.
And suddenly, after decades, the silence cracked. The news of the discovery spread instantly. In just a few hours, the school building, which had long forgotten the troubles of the past, found itself at the center of a new whirlwind. The library, silent yesterday, was now under guard. There were staff at the entrance, and there was a sense of unease in the air. But anxiety is not loud. It is quiet, sticky, the kind that hides under the skin. The backpack, which had lain behind the wall for half a century, now rested on the table, under the dim light of the lamp, in a silence that seemed thick as fog. The investigators were in no hurry. Every movement is almost a ritual. They opened the clasps and sorted through the contents with caution, as if they knew that they were touching not just things, but threads leading into the past. Inside were ordinary objects, textbooks, notebooks with writing on them, school notes,
A small lunchbox.
folded sandwich wrapper. Everything would look almost ordinary, almost touching, if it weren't for one thing. In the side pocket lay a piece of paper, folded in four. It looked fragile, yellowed, with jagged edges. One of the investigators carefully unfolded it, as if afraid of breaking the connection with the past. And he read aloud. "He won't let me go unless I keep quiet."
These words, like a whisper through the decades, in the air.
No one said a word. No explanation was needed. Everyone in the room felt. This is not just a phrase. This is a sign, a reminder, a warning.
A cry from beyond the wall of time.
The note was immediately passed on to experts. They checked everything: the ink, the handwriting, the structure of the paper, the match with children's notebooks. The results confirmed. Yes, Justin wrote this. And he wrote while he was still alive. His hand was shaking. His handwriting was sloppy. But it was his hand.
The city shook again.
The story that everyone tried to forget has returned with renewed vigor. The newspapers published headlines. Reporters were filming stories. Residents, once small children, now adults, were again calling out a name long erased from school registers. But now a new question has arisen. The question that made me feel cold inside.
Who hid the backpack behind the wall?
And why was it only found now? Who read that note but didn't respond? Who was silent all this time? After a backpack and a note were found in the wall of the library that left the entire city breathless, police began to act with special attention. For the first time in half a century, this was not just a memory, not a rumor, not a family pain. This was real confirmation that Justin was really here. And, perhaps, not of my own free will. Investigators immediately turned to city archives to examine the original plans for the school. And almost immediately they discovered something strange. The very wall inside which the backpack was found, according to all the drawings, should have been blank.
No voids, no technical passages, no attic passages, nothing.
This means that someone at some point deliberately created a shelter, made a niche,
Walled it up.
and either disappeared himself or wanted everything inside to disappear. A new expert group was assembled: engineers, builders, criminologists. They began to examine the room inch by inch. They tapped the walls, checked the rhythm of the masonry, and looked for the smallest deviations. One of the workers admitted that he had heard an unusual booming sound in this place last week, but did not pay any attention to it. Now, every brick echoed with alarm. And now, a few hours later, another find. Closer to the corner of the library, behind the shelves, experts discovered a hidden space.
Passy.
Narrow, covered with rubble, boards, dust. Almost completely closed and so carefully camouflaged that without special equipment it could not be noticed at all. Apparently, it was an old technical corridor, possibly once used to access utility lines. There is not a word about the school on the current plans. He disappeared from the records, as if he had never existed. The investigators carefully made their way inside.
The light from the lanterns penetrated the dust, casting on shadows. The floor cracked.
The walls exuded dampness. On the floor there are debris, splinters, and an old metal box with a rusty lock.
There is nothing inside, only dust and old marks of time.
But even that felt like a presence. Because everything around said, someone was here. They could have been hiding here. Or hiding someone. And yet, Justin was never found. This created even more mysteries, even more anxiety. If he was in this place, why didn't anyone know? Why is there only a backpack left and nothing else? Did he leave on his own? Or did someone leave in his place, leaving a void behind? The answers remained silent. Just like the walls, which have absorbed half a century of secrets. The townspeople began to remember, the library had always seemed strange. Children told of rustling sounds in the silence, of creaking sounds that could not have come from the books. Some even said they felt a cold gaze, as if someone was watching from behind the bookshelves. At the time, it was attributed to imagination, to a fear of the dark. But now, it all sounded different.
And again an uneasy feeling arose.
What if Justin was there all this time?
Right behind the wall.
Behind the bricks that no one thought to touch. And only now did we hear his voice. After the discovery of the note and the hidden corridor, the investigation received new impetus. The police decided to go back to the very beginning, to the people, to those who worked at the school in 1966. Especially to those who could be in the building after classes ended. Guards, cleaners, librarians, technicians, those who knew every corner and every passage, who could be invisible and yet know too much. The lists were incomplete. Some names were lost in archival documents, others disappeared over time. The director of that time died in the 80s. Several teachers and caretakers did too. Those who survived were very old and remembered almost nothing. Everyone said the same thing. Justin was a quiet, friendly child. No one could imagine that he would leave, hide, or find himself in an unpleasant situation. But in one of the old reports, a name surfaced that no one had mentioned before. Wilton, name changed, is the assistant librarian. He was not officially listed on the staff. He worked part-time, he helped with catalogs, put books away, and sometimes stayed overnight, especially if new batches of literature arrived. Silent, withdrawn, almost unnoticeable. As former employees put it, he just was. And then one day, he stopped being. The documents contain a short statement of resignation in December 1966. No explanation. After that, silence. And only many years later it became clear. He left the city, lived in seclusion, and came under the supervision of doctors. He died without a family, without a funeral, without memories. And everything would have remained forgotten if not for the circumstances. A quiet man. Access to the building outside working hours. Lack of official records.
Knowing the building from the inside.
And a disappearance that coincided in time with the disappearance of the boy. Investigators began to consider a new hypothesis. What if it was he who knew about the secret passages? What if it was he who could take advantage of this silence, this knowledge, this trust? And what if the note found in the backpack is not just a scream, but the last trace of someone who was trying to be heard? But if all this is true, why was he never found? Why is there only a backpack left? And if Wilton was indeed involved, did he act alone? Or did someone know and keep quiet? There were no answers, only questions. But now the library was no longer just a room for books. She became a symbol of the silence that lasted for half a century. And perhaps it was here, among the dust, silence and shelves, that the most terrible chapter in Justin's life began. While some investigators continued to sort through the archives, others expanded their search. After finding a secret passage in the library, it was decided to check the entire schoolyard. They decided to pay special attention to the back area adjacent to the old part of the building. It was then that a man appeared whom no one had called. An elderly man who once lived next to the school. In his hands is an old, yellowed newspaper. The voice is trembling but firm. In October of '66, about 2 weeks after the boy went missing, I smelled a strong odor near the library wall. Then I decided it was an animal.
Maybe a raccoon.
I called the police. One of the officers came, walked around the area, and left. They were looking outside the city, in the forest. His story was a turning point. It was at the very place indicated by the witness that the team of experts began their work.
At first, nothing. Used layers of earth, roots, stones.
But at a depth of less than a meter, the instruments hit something, metal. Then, the remains of the fabric. Forensic experts were called. Fragments of clothing, an old button, and a metal element, similar in shape to the door of a box or cell, were found. Age, height, build, everything pointed to it being Justin. DNA analysis was not possible. There were no longer any immediate relatives. But the indirect signs coincided. Experts have determined that the land was disturbed manually, carelessly. Someone was in a hurry. The order in which the remains were placed, the condition of the fabric, even the presence of scraps of rope, everything indicated that it had been done secretly and hastily. And the main thing is that no one noticed it.
Alpha Centauri.
When all this came to light, the city seemed to hold its breath. The lines from the previously found note sounded different. He won't let me go unless I keep quiet. Now they didn't sound like a premonition. And as a final, desperate attempt to be heard. But along with this, new questions emerged. If it all happened here, in the yard, why then was the backpack hidden in the wall? Who put it there? And when exactly did this happen? There was no answer.
Only silence.
The same one that has surrounded this story from the very beginning. After being found behind the school building, the picture, blurred by time, began to take on an alarming clarity. Investigators, having studied the evidence and reconstructed the chronology of events, came to the conclusion. Justin most likely did not leave the school grounds that day. He was invited, or lured, back inside by someone.
Without noise. Without resistance.
It could have been a person he trusted. Perhaps that same library assistant. The words could have been as simple as,
"You forgot the book.
I need a little help, you're always so responsible." And Justin, as always, did not refuse. When he entered the library, he may not have known that it was more than just a room with books. That there, behind the walls, there was a place that was not on any plane. An old technical passage.
A secret niche.
A space forgotten by all but one. This is where, according to experts, the boy was taken. Where there is no light, where sounds do not pass through the walls. He spent hours, maybe days. First, hoping, then, guessing, and then, he wrote that very note.
The only line left to the world.
He won't let me go unless I keep quiet. Maybe he wanted her to be found. Maybe he believed that one day someone would remove the plaster. What is true, even if it takes decades, will come out. But at that moment this did not happen. One night, in those very days when the whole city was living in anxiety, the boy was probably brought out of hiding. When the streets were empty and adults looked for answers in the forests and on the outskirts, he could have been just a few meters away. What happened next is not exactly known. But the tracks in the ground, the location of the objects found, and the haste with which everything was covered up, allowed us to conclude his life was cut short back then. And then, they hid it. Shallow, unnoticeable, in an area where almost no one looked. And on top there is garbage, earth, old containers. So that no one would guess. So that time erases the trace. And the backpack. He remained inside the library.
In the wall.
Maybe whoever did all this didn't dare take it with them. Or maybe he wanted to leave something.
Trace.
Or a reminder. Or, on the contrary, to hide the evidence so that no one will ever find it. And it almost worked. But now, after so many years, the truth has come to light again. And all this no longer looked like a coincidence. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was a crime. Done in the very heart of the school. Where they teach. Where they trust. Where children feel safe. But sometimes even walls can remain silent for too long. Sometimes they become part of someone else's fear. When news of the discovery and investigation reached the press, the city froze. But now it was not expectation, not hope, but fear. The newspapers were full of headlines. He was here all this time. And on the internet, in social networks, in the comments under the news, the line popped up again and again, which was once written by a boy frozen in time. He won't let me go if I don't keep quiet. People began to remember, especially those who studied at that school in the 60s and 70s. They said, the library always seemed strange, too quiet, too echoing. Some students were afraid to go there after school.
Someone heard creaks.
Someone heard rustling. And some people just felt that something was wrong. Back then, all this was called childish fantasies. But now, every memory sounded almost like a premonition. Interviews were being collected. One former student described feeling like someone was watching in the corner of the library. And one elderly teacher quietly said, "We tried to forget. Or maybe we were just afraid to remember." Meanwhile, experts have confirmed. The note is real. The ink, the paper, the handwriting, even the fingerprints, all indicated it was him.
Alive.
Waiting. It was no longer a guess. It was a fact. And then the past came into play. Records were found in the archives of the hospital where Wilton spent his last years.
Diagnosis.
Attacks.
Strange phrases.
And among them, there is one that suddenly acquired a different meaning.
He can't let go.
He doesn't leave.
Silence.
At the time, the nurses didn't understand what he was talking about. Now everyone understood. He disappeared. But his shadow remained. An intermediate state between what was and what they don't want to talk about. Now the city knew. Even if the culprit is no longer among us, the crime itself continues to live in the memory. Walls can remain silent for half a century, but the truth will still find a way. When the items found behind the school wall were officially confirmed as Justin's, the town finally understood. The mystery that had troubled several generations had found its long-awaited, albeit difficult, conclusion. What had remained hidden for decades had found its place in people's memories. They decided to hold a farewell.
Modest, without publicity.
Only a few people gathered at the old city cemetery, among the darkened monuments and rusty fences. Among them were an elderly relative, a former investigator, and several local residents. There were no cameras or loud speeches.
Only silence and a light autumn wind.
The woman, Justin's mother's cousin, placed an old school notebook next to his name. Its pages once contained homework assignments, notes, and drawings. She whispered, "He dreamed of becoming a teacher. He always helped others. He was a kind boy." They used to say, "It's better to know the truth than to guess all your life." But the truth, as it turns out, requires courage and time. Later, on the wall of the school library, in the very place where the old backpack was once found, a simple sign appeared.
In memory of Justin, the boy who never came home.
The school did not make this event public. There were no events, no assembly, no filming. Only internal silence, as if the building itself had lowered its head in a sign of peace. One of the students, passing by the sign, whispered, "Now I understand why I always felt uneasy in that corridor." And yet, even in this story there was something bright.
The city understood. Truth always finds a way.
Even if it is through decades. Even if it is through walls and silence. Let it be through one single phrase. "He won't let me go unless I keep quiet." But now there is no need to remain silent any longer. The investigation was completed. And although there was no direct legal basis for charges, many details, coincidences, and evidence allowed for the most likely picture of events to be formed. One of the employees, who once worked in the school library, left town shortly after Justin's disappearance and never contacted him again. According to investigators, he was the one who could have known about the features of the building, including undocumented areas. Because the man had long since died, no formal investigation was conducted. However, the final report noted that the facts discovered pointed to a chain of events that could not have been random. Everything indicated that Justin's disappearance was part of a more complex and hidden story. Life at the school went on. The library was completely renovated. Modern shelves, lighting, and ventilation systems were installed. The wall behind which the old find was found became an ordinary part of the interior. And yet, according to some employees, sometimes in the mornings there is a special silence in this place, as if the walls remember more than they can say. Teachers noted that children would unknowingly pass on fragments of stories to one another, as if they were urban legends. And a short note found inside a backpack became a symbol that echoed through the decades. "He won't let me go unless I keep quiet." One of the young police officers who took part in the investigation would later say, "Sometimes the most important thing is to hear what is not said directly. To understand that not all walls protect, some hide." Now the library is once again filled with voices, light, movement. Students are taking books, writing essays, preparing for exams. But on one of the walls hangs a small plaque, a reminder of what was. And although no one looks behind the walls now, the memory remains. Because even if something is hidden for decades, the truth still finds a way. Even after half a century of silence. If this story has touched you, leave a comment so that the memory does not fade. Give it a like, maybe it will reach those who need a reminder. And don't forget to subscribe. There are many more stories ahead that will show. Even the deepest shadow is not eternal.